April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above Cannes, France. The air is thin, razor cold, and the only warmth inside the B-17F Lucky Meridian comes from the hum of 4 Wright Cyclone engines vibrating through the aluminum skin. Frost blooms on the turret glass. The oxygen masks rasp with every breath. And then, just ahead, black blossoms of German flak erupt like malevolent flowers against the morning sky. Second Lieutenant Jack Rourke, the bombardier, steadies himself as the fortress jolts from a near burst. Shrapnel pings off the fuselage in metallic streaks. "Hold her level," he shouts forward, though his voice disappears beneath the growl of engines and the hollow echo inside his mask. Captain Elias Warren, pilot, grips the controls with gloved hands stiff from cold. The yoke vibrates in his palms, fighting him as the B-17 tries to slip into the turbulence of exploding shells. He nudges the rudder pedals, keeping formation. To his left and right, silver bombers stretch across the sky like a moving steel cathedral, the 91st Bomb Group pushing deep into enemy territory. The fortress was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to survive. A burst detonates near the starboard wing. The shockwave slams through the aircraft, and the wing dips as if kneeling under an invisible weight. The intercom crackles. "Right waist here. Shrapnel through the panel, but we're good. No fire." The voice belongs to Sergeant Owen Meyer, hunched behind his .50 caliber Browning M2, his gloves stained with oil and cordite. The German gunners below know exactly where the Americans are headed, a ball-bearing plant critical to the Nazi war machine. Without those bearings, tanks, aircraft, and armored transports grind to a halt. The Luftwaffe has scrambled fighters to intercept, but first the fortresses must run the gauntlet of anti-aircraft batteries, the flak alley. You can almost hear the strain in the aircraft's bones, the metal groaning as if alive. Every rivet was placed for a reason, every beam reinforced so that hits like these, dozens of them, wouldn't bring the bird down. That ruggedness wasn't an accident. It was the philosophy behind the flying fortress. Build something that takes punishment and keeps flying. Another explosion, closer this time, rocks the fuselage. The top turret gunner, Tech Sergeant Ray Delgado, swivels instinctively, scanning the horizon for fighters. Ice crystals swirl around his dome like drifting stars. "Bandits will be up here soon," he mutters, mostly to himself. "Always are." Inside the cramped radio compartment, Sergeant Milton Crane taps out position updates, his hands trembling only slightly as he works. The B-17's antenna wire hums, stretched taut along the aircraft's spine. Milton looks up at the overhead stringers, thinking, as many crewmen do during these missions, how strange it is that something so fragile-looking can keep them alive. But outwardly, the fortress is all strength. A boxy, purposeful silhouette, bristling with machine guns in nearly every direction. This very design allowed her to escort herself on long missions before long-range Allied fighters were available. To the Germans she looked like a hedgehog bristling with quills. Approaching IP, Warren calls over the intercom. The initial point, the beginning of the bombing run. After this the aircraft cannot deviate. Straight and level. Predictable. Vulnerable. Rourke slides into position over the Norden bomb site, its gyroscopic cradle humming beneath him. He removes his gloves despite the cutting cold. The Norden demands precision and sensitivity. Through the glass, the distant shapes of the Cannes industrial district fade in and out between plumes of flak. Down below, German gunners adjust their aim. Inside the fortress, breaths deepen, pacing quickens. No one speaks, but everyone listens. A new sound emerges, the rattling staccato of distant engines. Delgado spots them first, fighters 10 o'clock high. Looks like 109s. He swings the turret and thumbs the triggers. The twin 50s erupt, their recoil thudding through the aircraft like a heartbeat. The escorting P-47s dive in to intercept, their vapor trails spiraling in messy arcs. But one Messerschmitt breaks through, slicing toward the bomber formation with cannon fire blinking like sparks on an anvil. Tracer rounds streak past the Lucky Meridian, red slashes against the pale sky. The right waist gunner returns fire, his .50 cal bouncing in a violent rhythm. The Messerschmitt peels away, smoke trailing from its wing root, but more fighters are coming. Still, the fortress holds steady, something almost defiant in the way she slices through the flak and chaos, refusing to be knocked from her path. Rourke lines up the crosshairs on the target. Steady, steady. Outside, flames lick from a burning bomber 2 positions ahead, parachutes bloom from its belly. Warren forces himself not to look. Not now. The bombardier's voice tightens. Bombs away. The release clamps snap open and a ripple of heavy ordnance tumbles toward the earth, leaving the B-17 suddenly lighter, floating upward as though freed from a weight it was never meant to carry. It's only then, as the bombardier closes the doors and the fortress banks westward, that the crew realizes just how battered their aircraft has become. Ragged holes torn through the fuselage. Aileron cables nicked but intact. The starboard engine coughing irregularly, oil streaming behind it like smoke. But she's still flying. And this moment, is where the legend of the flying fortress begins. The lucky Meridian claws westward, limping but alive, leaving a trail of oil and smoke against the frozen heavens. Inside the vibrating fuselage, the crew settles back into their stations, some exhaling in relief, others bracing for what still might come. A damaged fortress is not a safe fortress, and every man aboard knows the Luftwaffe rarely lets a wounded bomber go home unchallenged. But even as the crew regains their rhythm, the aircraft itself becomes the narrator of a deeper story, a story that began years earlier, long before Europe was burning. It started in 1935 in a Boeing workshop in Seattle, where a radical idea was taking shape: build a bomber that didn't need escorts. A bomber so fast, so rugged, and so heavily armed that it could survive on its own. Engineers Edward Curtis Wells, E. Gifford Emery, and Robert Minshall pored over blueprints, pushing boundaries that seemed more like wishful thinking than practical design. Back then, the bomber was known not as a legend but simply as Model 299, a sleek prototype with a wingspan longer than most apartment buildings. Reporters laughed when Boeing rolled it onto the airfield, calling it too much airplane. But after a demonstration flight where it unleashed a withering barrage from multiple gun positions, one journalist scribbled a phrase in his notebook, a phrase that would define it forever: a flying fortress. The Army Air Corps embraced the name, and Boeing made sure the design lived up to it. Back in the sky over France, Captain Warren steadies the wounded aircraft. His gloved fingers tap each instrument, checking, memorizing, adjusting. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Samuel Kearns, leans forward, pressing a palm against the windshield as if feeling the pulse of the aircraft through the cold glass. "Starboard 3's losing pressure," Kearns mutters. Warren nods. "Feather it if it starts to run away." Below decks, the ball turret gunner, Sergeant Lewis Grant, floats in his cramped metal sphere. He feels the fortress shudder with each adjustment, the machine responding like a living creature stitched together by rivets and willpower. Grant runs a boot against the turret floor, marveling yet again at the engineering that brought this metal cocoon into existence. The B-17's durability wasn't an accident, and the men flying it felt that every day. The aircraft's frame was built from a complex lattice of aluminum alloy, longerons, bulkheads, spar webs, all designed so that even if large portions were blown away, the structure stayed intact. Fuel tanks were self-sealing. Control cables were duplicated, often triplicate, running through different parts of the fuselage so a single lucky strike wouldn't sever them all. And the guns? Oh, the guns. 13.50 caliber Brownings at the aircraft's peak configuration. 5,000 rounds spread among them. A weapon in nearly every direction. Enemy pilots learned quickly that head-on attacks were death wishes. The fortress could spit fire in a 360-degree arc, a metal porcupine commanding respect. Ray Delgado in the top turret sweeps his guns across the sky, searching for any speck that doesn't belong. He knows the Luftwaffe favors lightning-fast slashing attacks, one pass then gone. The fortress's armor plating protects the most vulnerable crew positions, but only so much. It's the guns, the teamwork, and the overlapping fields of fire that keep them alive. Radio, Warren calls out. "See if the group is still intact." Sergeant Crane toggles his headset, listening through static. Faint voices filter through, call signs, altitude reports, damage tallies. Even without seeing the formation, he knows the truth: today's cost has been heavy. It always is. He glances at the overhead bulkhead, hearing the faint pinging of contracting metal as the aircraft descends to a warmer altitude. He remembers reading once that Boeing engineers repeatedly fired pistols and cannon rounds into test frames to understand how the aircraft absorbed damage. They learned how stress traveled through the ribs and spars, how skin panels buckled but didn't tear away. Their findings became the blueprint for a bomber that could lose half a wing, chunks of tail, even an entire engine, and still carry its crew home. And here, in this very moment, the lucky Meridian is proving that legacy true. Outside, the sky begins to clear. Flak fades behind them. Vapor trails of the remaining formation stretch toward the English Channel. The fortress banks slightly, the left wing dipping, guiding its crew toward home. But the danger isn't gone. Because the Luftwaffe knows the return flight is where damaged bombers are easiest prey. And even as the lucky meridian limps westward, a formation of German fighters is already circling like wolves, waiting for their chance. The fortress was engineered for moments just like this. Moments where design became survival, where braces and beams and guns and grit fused into one singular purpose: bring the crew home. The lucky meridian descends through a thinning cloud layer, the skies brightening as the coastline draws ever so slightly closer. The tension eases, but only for a heartbeat. Then Ray Delgado's voice cuts through the intercom like a snapped cable. Fighters. 6 o'clock low. Multiple. Closing fast. No one needs further explanation. Every man aboard knows the profile: sleek, narrow wings, the glint of sunlight off yellow-nosed cowls. JG-26, the famed Abbeville boys. Some of the deadliest pilots in Europe. The fortress may be tough, but this is where wounded bombers are tested. Where pilots like Hauptmann Dieter Kruger leading the pack today carve quickly through the stragglers. And the lucky Meridian, limping behind her formation, is exactly the kind of prey they want. Stay tight, Captain Warren orders, pulling gently on the yoke. His movements must be precise. One overcorrection, one heavy-handed turn, and the weakened right wing could shear. The German fighters drop into attack position, engines snarling like angry hornets. The sun silhouettes them into black arrows. A moment later, the first cannon rounds scream past, bright green tracer streaks slicing through the air. The tail gunner, Staff Sergeant Henry Hawk Dalton, braces his boots against the turret floor and unleashes a burst from twin .50 caliber guns. The recoil shakes through his shoulders, rattling his teeth. Dalton tracks one Bf-109 arcing upward, peppering it with fire. A wingtip bursts into sparks. The fighter pulls away, streaming smoke. But there are more. Many more. Inside the radio compartment, Crane flinches as rounds punch through the fuselage behind him, shredding insulation and sending aluminum fragments across his desk. He ducks instinctively, but his hands never stop moving, patching into the nearest fortress, trying to signal they're hit but still flying. Sergeant Grant, curled into the ball turret beneath the fuselage, is the only man who can see the enemy's approach without obstruction. Through his rotating dome, the landscape below tilts, shifts, and swings as he tracks two fighters closing from dead low. Two coming up the belly. Grant barks. He squeezes the triggers. The turret's guns spit fire downward, arcs of brass casings clattering through the sphere like hail. One German fighter breaks away, the other continues upward. Then, impact. A thud ripples through the aircraft. Grant's turret jolts violently. For a split second he thinks the mechanism has jammed. But the truth strikes him colder than the air outside. The Germans are hitting them with 20mm cannon fire. Above him, in the waist compartment, Meyer grips his gun handles and fires in long, controlled bursts. Smoke from his barrel hangs in the air like a fog. His oxygen mask shifts as he shouts, "Left waist to pilot, enemy circling for another pass." Kearns squints through the side window. We can't outrun them. We hold course. The logic is brutal but true. Slowing down or turning makes them easier targets. Straight, steady flight, the only thing keeping the aircraft from becoming a burning coffin. The next attack comes in from the high right. Kruger himself dives toward the fortress, timing his cannon bursts to intersect where the bomber will be, not where it is. It's the mark of an experienced killer. Delgado swings the top turret and fires a 3-second burst, the heavy .50 calories thumping so hard he feels the impact deep in his chest. Tracers streak upward, crossing paths with the descending 109. Kruger rolls left, the tracers grazing his underbelly but not stopping him. He fires. The cannon shells tear along the spine of the fortress. One punches through the radio room bulkhead, another slams into the oxygen line above the waist. A white mist bursts into the compartment, deadly if ignited. Meyer shut that valve. Now. Meyer lunges for the wall panel, twisting the shutoff wheel with frantic, frozen fingers. The mist dissipates, but the smell of ruptured sealant stays thick in the air. In the cockpit, a shudder rolls through the controls. Warren's eyes flick to the engine gauges. Starboard 3 has finally given up. The propeller slows, coughing like a dying animal. Feathering 3, Kearns says, pushing the control lever. The propeller blades twist into the wind, stopping the wild spin. The fortress lurches, losing a chunk of its remaining power. The Germans sense weakness. They reposition. In the ball turret, Grant's breathing quickens. Sweat forms despite the frigid temperature. His guns track a fighter climbing beneath them for a textbook belly attack. One of the most feared maneuvers against a damaged bomber. Got one right under us, he's lining up. Grant squeezes the triggers. The guns clatter. The fighter rises, growing larger in his sight picture, and then a flash. A clean hit. The Messerschmitt erupts in a fireball, debris spiraling away as the wreck falls toward the channel. The crew erupts in cheers that last only seconds. Because Delgado reports what everyone fears. They're regrouping. More incoming. The Lucky Meridian continues west, wings trembling, engines roaring unevenly. The gunners reset, hands shaking but steadying on the triggers. This is the part of the mission few talk about, the long, desperate run toward home while wolves nip at your heels. But the fortress was built for exactly this kind of fight. And she isn't done yet. The sky ahead is turning the pale blue of late afternoon, but behind the Lucky Meridian, the horizon is streaked with smoke and flame. The German fighters regroup in disciplined arcs, their engines snarling as they prepare for another coordinated attack, one that could finish the crippled bomber for good. Inside the cockpit, Elias Warren repositions his feet on the rudder pedals. His right boot slides slightly, there's oil on the floor from a ruptured pressure line. He wipes his glove and tightens his grip. "Everyone stay sharp," he says into the intercom. "They won't give us many more chances." Lieutenant Kearns scans the formation ahead. Fewer fortresses now. Gaps where aircraft should be. The 91st Bomb Group looks like a damaged shield with missing plates, and the Lucky Meridian is among the most battered of all. Then the warning comes, not from a gunner but from instinct. The fighters split into two prongs. One group diving from the sun, the other sweeping low under the belly. A pincer attack. Here they come. Meyer shouts from the waist. Delgado in the top turret whips around, his guns roaring. The muzzle flashes illuminate the plexiglass as if lightning is trapped inside with him. He tracks a 109 diving from high right, cutting loose with a burst that stitches fire across its wing. The fighter wobbles, wings rolling unevenly, then levels off, bleeding smoke. Darwinian logic rules the sky. The wounded predator turns away. Stronger ones take its place. Below, the ball turret rocks violently as Sergeant Grant spins his little metal world to intercept the fighters approaching low. He feels the fortress shudder with each hit, each burst of outgoing fire. Sweat burns his eyes, his oxygen mask is soaked. He sees a twin-engine Bf-110 rising toward them, its silhouette unmistakable, its nose bristling with cannon barrels. This isn't a hunter. It's an executioner. Grant pulls the trigger first. The turret bucks, hammering his spine. A cascade of brass shells rattles around his feet. Tracers arc toward the 110's canopy, but the German heavy fighter keeps coming, its cannons blinking like camera flashes in a dark room. The first shells hit the belly of the Lucky Meridian. The shock nearly knocks Grant unconscious. Something tears, metal, wiring, insulation, he can't tell. Wind howls into the fuselage above him. He feels the turret jerk to one side as if the world has tilted. Ball turrets hit. Grant gasps, his breath fogging inside his mask. In the waist compartment, Meyer and Dalton scramble to assess the damage. Dalton reaches the intercom cable hanging from the ceiling and shouts over the wind, "Pilot, ball turret's jammed." He's stuck. "Keep him calm," Warren answers, though his voice cracks around the edges. "We'll get him home." The 110 swings around for another pass. This time the German doesn't aim for the belly. He goes high. Straight for the cockpit. Kearns sees it first. "Captain, he's coming right for us." Warren jerks the yoke left, not too hard or the starboard wing will fail. Not too soft or the fighter's cannons will shred them. The fortress banks sluggishly, wounded but obedient. The 110 misses by less than 20 feet, streaking past the side window like a bird of prey. Dalton and Meyer rake it with fire as it passes, their Brownings roaring until the barrels glow dull red. One of the waist gunner's tracers finds the 110's starboard engine. Flames bloom along the nacelle. The German pilot tries to dive away, but the fighter rolls uncontrollably and disintegrates in midair, fragments scattering like burning leaves. For a moment, one fragile, impossible moment, there's silence. Then Delgado speaks again. "More fighters dropping in behind us. 5, maybe 6. The crew braces. They know this pattern. They've seen it on every mission. The first waves hit hard. The last waves kill. But something catches Warren's eye, a glint far to the west. Moving fast. A faint humming over the roar of their own engines. Kearns leans forward, squinting. "Is that?" Delgado's voice cracks with hope. "Friendly fighters. Coming in from 10 o'clock. 3 shapes burst from the cloud cover, bulky, muscular silhouettes with broad wings and throaty engines. P-47 Thunderbolts, diving like avenging angels. The Luftwaffe sees them too. In seconds the German fighters scatter. The P-47s slam into their formation with overwhelming speed. Tracer paths crisscross the sky. A thunderbolt slices past the Lucky Meridian, banking hard, its pilot giving a small, casual wing waggle, as if to say, "We've got you now." For the first time in what feels like hours, the crew of the Lucky Meridian can breathe. But the danger isn't gone. The fortress is still bleeding altitude. Still missing an engine. Still carrying a trapped gunner. And the English coast is still miles away. "Crew," Warren says quietly, "we're not out of this yet. Stay with me." He banks the aircraft toward home. Behind them, the final German fighter breaks off and disappears into the clouds. Ahead, the sun stretches across the channel like a path. And the fortress flies on. The English Channel spreads beneath the Lucky Meridian like a sheet of hammered steel, its surface rippling in the late afternoon light. The fortress descends gradually, not by choice but by necessity. With one engine dead, another coughing, and the fuselage torn open in several places, maintaining altitude has become a slow, deliberate battle. Captain Warren monitors the instruments, jaw clenched. The altimeter needle drifts downward at a rate he doesn't like. "We're losing about 50 feet per minute," he murmurs. "Can we hold that?" Kearns asks. Warren hesitates. If nothing else gives way. Behind them, the bomber's interior tells a harsher truth. The oxygen line in the waste compartment is still venting a faint chemical tang. Frost clings to the jagged edges of ruptured metal. Dalton moves from window to window, checking for structural cracks, while Meyer presses a rag against a leaking hydraulic line, trying to slow the drip. Every man aboard is running on adrenaline fumes. In the ball turret, Sergeant Grant remains trapped. His voice is shallow over the intercom, the tremor unmistakable. "How's it look up there?" "We're working on it," Dalton replies, kneeling beside the gear housing. He pries at the warped panel with a screwdriver, hands shaking. Turret rings bent. "We'll free you once we're on the ground." Grant swallows hard. If they have to belly land with him still inside the turret, it'll crush him instantly. He knows this. They all know this. Warren clicks on the intercom. "Grant, listen to me. You hang tight. We'll get you out when we touch down. I promise." Grant forces a breath, the voice inside the turret barely a whisper. "Copy, holding on." The channel wind batters the bomber's nose, whistling through the holes peppered along the fuselage. Crane in the radio room sends out the distress call. "Low altitude, structural damage, ball turret jammed, requesting emergency landing clearance." Static snaps back, then a British controller answers. "Roger, Lucky Meridian. Divert to RAF Bassingbourn. Emergency runway is clear." Kearns lets out a breath. "We've got a path." But paths only matter if the aircraft survives long enough to follow them. Another shudder ripples through the right wing. Warren reacts instantly, adjusting trim tabs and easing pressure on the yoke. The fortress feels sluggish, her response is delayed, as if her spirit is still fighting but her body is failing. "Pilot," Meyer calls from the waist, "we've got a crack spreading across the starboard spar housing." Warren squeezes his eyes shut for half a second. Damage to a wing spar is the kind of thing that ends flights fast. "How bad?" Kearns asks. "Not through," Meyer says. "But it's growing. Every time we hit turbulence." The sentence finishes itself. Warren steadies the aircraft, keeping the wings level. The channel wind gusts again, rattling the battered frame. He rides it gently as though cradling the fortress in his hands. This aircraft has brought them this far. Now they must return the favor. Out the nose, the English coastline begins to rise from the haze. White cliffs. Rolling farmland. A thin ribbon of railway. "Oh." Delgado's voice cracks over the intercom, not in fear but in disbelief. "Boys, we made it to the coast." A wave of relief washes through the fuselage. Meyer sinks onto an ammo box. Dalton leans his head back against a bulkhead. Crane murmurs a thank you, he's too exhausted to finish. Warren and Kearns exchange a brief, wordless look, the kind only men who have flown through hell can understand. But the mission isn't over. Warren keys the mic. "Bassingbourn, this is Lucky Meridian. We're inbound with heavy structural damage and an immobilized gunner. Requesting immediate landing priority." "Cleared for approach, Meridian," the tower replies. Emergency crews are standing by. The fortress descends over English farmland, the runway gleaming ahead. Kearns scans the airspeed indicator. "We're fast." "We have to be," Warren replies. "If I drop below stall speed with this wing," another unspoken truth. Dalton kneels beside the ball turret once more. He rests a gloved hand on the metal shell. "We're almost home, Grant." Hold on. Grant's answer is faint. Just get us down. Warren aligns the bomber with the runway. The aircraft shudders, groaning under the strain. The landing gear extends with a sickening metallic whine, and for a moment the crew wonders if it will lock. Then click. Lock. Kearns exhales. Here we go. The ground rises. The engines roar unevenly. The wind screams across the cockpit glass. Warren eases the Fortress down. The wheels kiss the runway, then slam hard. The starboard landing gear wobbles dangerously, the wing threatening to collapse. Warren wrestles with the yoke, fighting physics, damage, and sheer exhaustion. The Lucky Meridian skids, sparks flying from a damaged brake assembly. Kearns braces a hand on the dashboard. Hold her, Warren grits his teeth and pulls back gently. The Fortress straightens. Rolls. Slows. Stops. Silence. Then, erupting through the intercom, ball turrets intact. We can free him. Dalton and Meyer scramble to pry open the jammed turret ring. Ground crew rush toward them. Tools clatter. Metal bends. The access panel pops loose with a metallic snap. Hands reach in. And they pull Grant out, soaked in sweat, trembling but alive. The men haul him onto the runway. For the first time all day he feels fresh air on his face. The crew gathers around him. Warren, Kearns, Delgado, Meyer, Dalton, Crane. No one speaks. They don't need to. Behind them the Fortress sits battered, burned, holed, but upright. A monument to engineering. To persistence. To the strange alchemy between metal and men. It was not speed that saved them. It was not armor alone. It was grit. And teamwork. And a bomber designed to refuse death. And this day, this mission, would become one of thousands that proved why the B-17 earned a name no enemy could ever deny. The Flying Fortress. Night settles over RAF Bassingbourn, washing the airfield in shades of blue and amber as floodlights cast long shadows across the tarmac. The Lucky Meridian sits roped off now, a crowd of ground crew circling her slowly, hands on hips, clipboards under arms, studying the battered machine that somehow defied physics and willpower to return home. Captain Warren stands just outside the cordon, coat thrown over his shoulders, boots still muddy from the runway. The adrenaline has drained from him, leaving only a quiet, reflective fatigue. Beside him, Kearns watches as welders set up lamps, illuminating the holes that pepper the fuselage like a constellation of near-death experiences. But Warren's mind is still back in the sky, replaying every shudder, every jolt, every moment when the Fortress held together through sheer engineering defiance. Because the truth is this: the B-17 that returned today was not the same B-17 that first took flight in 1935. It had evolved, again and again, each change written in the blood, sweat, and hard-earned lessons of crews like theirs. As the ground crew chief, Master Sergeant Roland Price, runs a hand along a charred oxygen line, he mutters, "If this were an early C model, she wouldn't have made it past the channel." And he's right. The earliest B-17s, the B-17B and C, carried lighter armament, fewer guns, thinner armor. Their turrets were primitive. Their defenses incomplete. And when the first E-models reached Europe, commanders quickly realized that the Luftwaffe, seasoned from years of combat, was far more dangerous than American planners had imagined. So the aircraft evolved. Piece by piece. Gun by gun. Experience became blueprint. Price shines a light toward the top fuselage. "See that?" he says, pointing to the familiar armored turret where Delgado had fought off the 109s. "That's a Bendix turret. Didn't exist on the early birds. Crews called for better coverage up top, so Boeing added it." Nearby, Dalton listens with tired eyes but sharp memory. He still hears the roar of his waist guns, still feels the recoil. "Didn't used to have staggered waist positions either," he says. "Used to bump hips with the other gunner every time we fired." The ground chief nods. "Exactly. So they changed it. You men asked for more room. They made it." The B-17's evolution was never theoretical. It was a conversation between factory floors and battlefields. Between the men who built it and the men who trusted it with their lives. Inside the maintenance hangar, another crew wheels over a scorched engine cowling from the Lucky Meridian. Warren steps closer, examining the jagged shrapnel holes. These holes are the reason the B-17 engineers strengthened the engine mounts, redesigned the oil coolers, and added redundancies that allowed a Fortress to limp home on 2 engines, or sometimes 1. The war reshaped the aircraft, and the aircraft reshaped the war. Crane enters the hangar. A stack of message sheets tucked under his arm. His face is still smudged with soot, but his voice carries the calm he always held in the radio compartment. "Command wants a full damage report by morning," he says. They think this might be one for the engineering board. Warren raises an eyebrow. You mean, the changes? Yeah, Crane says. The missing armor panel, the oxygen leak, the spar housing crack. They want all of it documented. Lessons learned. Warren exchanges a glance with Kearns. Every failure today, every near-fatal weakness, might become the next improvement. The next reinforcement. The next added gun or thicker panel. The flying fortress wasn't born fully formed. It was shaped by missions like this. Out on the tarmac, Grant limps toward them, a blanket around his shoulders, his legs still unsteady from hours spent curled inside the turret. Meyer walks beside him, supporting his arm. You should be resting, Warren calls to him. Grant manages a thin smile. Figured I'd say goodnight to the old girl. He gazes at the lucky meridian, lit from below by halogens. Every dent, scorch mark and missing plate is visible. She took everything they threw at her, Grant murmurs. And she still got us home. Price overhears him and steps closer. That's why she's the fortress, son. But she didn't get that name from newspapers. Not really. She earned it from crews like yours. Grant nods, eyes tired but bright. Feels like she watches over us. The ground chief pats the fuselage. And we watch over her. That's how this works. Warren stands back, absorbing the moment. The crew gathered around their battered aircraft, the hangar lights painting her in heroic silhouette. Tomorrow she'll go into deep repair. Some panels replaced. Others hammered back into shape. Maybe she'll fly again soon. Maybe she won't. But the B-17 is a legend? That is already bigger than any single aircraft. It is an idea forged in aluminum and fire. An idea that evolved every time a fortress went into battle, and came back changed. And tomorrow, another crew will climb aboard another B-17, trusting that every improvement born from days like this will carry them through the next storm. Because the fortress wasn't just built to fight. It was built to learn. To adapt. To survive. Before dawn, a thin veil of fog clings to the edges of RAF Bassingbourn. The airfield hums quietly, diesel trucks rumbling, mechanics clattering wrenches, the faint metallic echo of early morning labor. The lucky Meridian sits at the edge of it all, still scarred from yesterday's mission, still surrounded by scaffolding and floodlights. But today the focus has shifted. Crews gather around briefing huts. New target maps are pinned to walls. Fresh crews step onto the cold concrete, breath steaming in the chill. Among them, Warren, Kearns, and the rest of the Lucky Meridian's men watch in silence. Their own aircraft won't fly today, but others will. The war never stops for one bomber. Inside the briefing room, the operations officer points to a red circle on a large map of Europe. Deep within Germany. A ball-bearing facility. Another. A synthetic oil refinery. A marshalling yard feeding half the Wehrmacht's armored divisions. Each objective bleeds into the next, forming a vast network that keeps the Nazi war machine alive. These targets, the officer says, tapping the map with a pointer, are the arteries. Cut them and the Reich's limbs go numb. The crews nod. They know this. They feel it every time they fly. The B-17 was not merely an aircraft, it was a strategy forged long before America entered the war. The doctrine of industrial bombardment was built on one premise. You don't win by trading bullets with every soldier on the ground. You win by crippling the factories that make the bullets. As the crews shuffle out, Warren lingers behind, studying the board. He traces a finger along the route drawn with blue chalk, a long, perilous line stretching across the North Sea and deep inland. He knows what awaits them at every checkpoint. Flak belts. Jageschwader squadrons. Storms that can tear a wing from its bolts. Crane steps up beside him. Every mission's heavier than the last, the radio man murmurs. Warren nods. And every time the fortress carries more weight than we do. He's not wrong. The evolution of the B-17 had been in lockstep with the evolution of the war. The stakes grew and the aircraft grew with them. Outside, the distant roar of engines builds, a cluster of fortresses taxiing out onto the runway. Their silhouettes are enormous in the morning fog, the condensation around their props swirling like halos. Ground crews give thumbs up, chocks are pulled, and the first bomber begins its rolling charge. Grant watches from the edge of the tarmac, wrapped in a clean uniform and still stiff from yesterday's ordeal. His eyes follow each aircraft as it thunders past. He knows the routine too well. Climb out, form up, altitude, the long glide toward enemy airspace. Meyer steps beside him. Hard watching them go without us, isn't it? Grant sighs. Hard knowing what they're flying into. A formation of 12 fortresses lifts into the sky, their engines blending into a single deep, chest-thumping growl. The sound vibrates through the ground, through their boots, through their nerves. The ground chief, Price, arrives holding a clipboard dampened by morning dew. Command estimates another 3 months before the Germans feel the full sting, he says quietly. Once the oil refineries start collapsing, it'll break them. 3 months, Grant repeats. Feels like a lifetime. Price nods. That's how strategic bombing works. One strike at a time. One factory at a time. One convoy, one rail yard, one engine plant. His voice trails off as a second wave of B-17s lifts into the sky, dozens now. Their shadows pass across the field like migrating giants. Warren approaches, his boots crunching in the frost. The brass says yesterday's mission hit the ball-bearing plant hard enough to cut production by almost 40%. Dalton exhales. That's going to hurt them. Not enough, Warren replies. Not yet. The conversation hangs heavy in the air. Because everyone on that runway knows the truth. The B-17 was one of the few tools capable of reaching deep into Germany, striking targets the enemy believed untouchable. But each victory came at a cost, sometimes a dozen aircraft, sometimes 20, sometimes entire squadrons. The sky above Bassingbourn grows loud again as another group thunders down the runway. They lift into formation, their wings glinting in the pale morning light. Crane watches their ascent and speaks softly, almost to himself. They look like they're rising into the sun. Warren nods. And by dusk, some won't be returning. A quiet settles over the crew as the last bombers climb into the cloud layer, disappearing into the gray. Behind them, a mechanic calls out from atop the Lucky Meridian, wiping grease off his gloves. Captain, we're making progress up here. She'll fly again, give us a little time. Warren smiles faintly. She's earned the rest. But deep down he knows she'll be needed. The war is turning but slowly, too slowly. The fortresses must keep flying. Must keep hammering the Reich where it hurts. While the soldiers fight in Italy. While the Soviets push across the Eastern Front. While the Navy claws through the Pacific. The B-17s carry the war straight into the industrial heart of Nazi Germany. It is a brutal rhythm. A grinding one. Yet day after day the air crews climb aboard and trust the fortress to bring them home. And more often than not, it does. The fog has burned off by midday, leaving the sky over Bassingbourn a pale, winter blue. The airfield, once rumbling with the thunder of takeoff, settles into an uneasy quiet. Mechanics move like ants across the dispersal pads. Officers walk with clipboards tucked under their arms. Fuel trucks hiss as they top off the next day's aircraft. But at the end of the runway, where the Lucky Meridian rests on her newly replaced landing gear, the crew stands together, silent, thoughtful, changed. Warren moves his hand across the patched fuselage. Fresh aluminum plates glint where shrapnel once tore through. The paint has yet to cover the scars. Maybe it never will. Maybe it shouldn't. Grant stands at his side. She brought us home, the gunner says softly. She always does, Warren replies. For a moment, the two men simply listen, to distant engines, to the clatter of tools, to the quiet wind sweeping across the open field. It sounds nothing like flak bursts. Nothing like roaring .50 caliber fire. Nothing like screaming alarms or the metallic groan of a wounded airframe. It is peaceful. And in that peace, the truth of the B-17 becomes clear. It wasn't the metal alone. It wasn't the bombs. It wasn't even the guns. It was the people, the crews who climbed aboard knowing what waited for them above Europe. The men who trusted the fortress with their lives. The engineers shaping it into something stronger with every revision. The ground crews who rebuilt broken wings through cold nights and long hours. The radio men sending maydays while their hands bled. The gunners firing until their barrels glowed red. The pilots holding formation as flak tore the sky apart. And through them all, the B-17 endured. Its missions over Germany shattered factories, crippled oil production, broke supply chains, and strained the Nazi war machine until it buckled. But the real story lived inside each aircraft. 12 men sealed in an aluminum world at 25,000 feet, fighting physics, frostbite, and fear as much as they fought the Luftwaffe. The sun hangs low now, casting long shadows across the airfield. Another day will come. Another mission. Another formation rising into the cold morning sky. But for the Lucky Meridian and her crew, the war has distilled into one enduring truth. The B-17 Flying Fortress did more than dominate the skies. It carried hope, fear, sacrifice, and resolve across every mile of hostile territory. It carried a generation of men into history. And it brought so many of them home when nothing else could. Warren steps back from the aircraft and looks at his crew, tired, bruised, but alive. Get some rest, he tells them. Tomorrow starts early. They nod. A few clap each other on the shoulders. A few keep their eyes on the sky where the morning's formations vanished hours ago. All of them know what tomorrow means. As they walk toward the barracks, the lucky Meridian sits quietly behind them, silver scars gleaming. A survivor. A symbol. A fortress.